kinini. Bamfasha kugera ku ishuri. Perezida ni ugufasha abafite ubumuga.
My name is Bonita Sharma. I was born in Nepal and had the chance to go to school. Not all girls in my country have an opportunity to access or complete an education. Getting an education has enabled me to live a better life and help my community. As a female champion, I initiated the project Action for Nutrition. We went to different rural villages where young girls and boys, they lacked proper quality education and access to information on nutrition. We are just taking a baby steps towards our objective of empowering these young girls, making them healthy, making them nutritionally healthy as well. So I hope to take this idea to different rural, remote parts of the country where girls still lack basic access to education.
The UNESCO Female Champions Program provides educational opportunities to girls and enables them to lead community-based learning projects. Through the UNESCO Malala Fund, UNESCO and CJ have empowered girls and women in Nepal to live a better life and have a brighter future through education. This is the true power of education.
Around 50% of children with disabilities are not in school in low and middle income countries, and when they are, they are often educated in segregated settings or they are not adequately supported. There are many reasons why learners with disabilities are excluded from quality education. School facilities not being accessible, limited teacher training on inclusive education and support, the lack of assistive technologies, and poor health, poverty, discrimination, and stigma. Difficulties in accessing and thriving in education increase when multiple discrimination factors intersect. For example, a girl with disabilities from a family living in poverty and in a rural area will see her chances of schooling significantly reduced. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the inequities and the interconnections between children's care, safety, well-being. Inclusive education is a transformative process that ensures quality learning opportunities for all learners, with no discrimination and in settings where they all learn together. In order to achieve Sustainable Development Goal N4 and comply with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we call on education leaders to set the vision and work in collaboration with other actors across sectors. We also call on all stakeholders to put the child at the center, considering their rights, needs, and opinion, and on governments and donors to mobilize resources that promote inclusion over segregation, with specific investments to support children with disabilities in education. Let's work together to make inclusive education a reality.
Equitable, safe, and healthy schools. My name is Maria Nguyen. I'm an International Education Officer at Family Planning New South Wales, based in Australia. and a youth representative from the SDG for Youth Network. I'm also co-leading Action Track 1 with my colleagues from the Ministries of Education from Namibia and Italy. Now, it's day 3. We've talked a lot about transforming education, and we need to transform, not reform. Reform after reform hasn't got us to where we should be. And in order to transform education, we really need to truly change our mindsets. We need to think of education as an investment for our shared future, education as a tool for empowerment, and education as a human right. Over the next 75 minutes, you will see a different vision, one where all learners have unhindered access to education, are safe and healthy, free from violence and discrimination, and receive comprehensive care services at school. We will show you why this is essential to unlock the potential of all learners in all their diversities, and why it's needed to transform institutions to achieve fair, equal, inclusive, and peaceful societies. It is possible, and we must make it happen. I now invite my co-lead from Action Track 1 to deliver his opening remarks for today's session, the Minister of Education, Mr. Patricio Bianchi.
To all of you for being today in Paris in this fantastic meeting. We are discussing about inclusion, and this is the track 1 that we discuss with our friend in Namibia, that I have to thank the Minister of Namibia, but we have discussed at national levels with young people, teachers, families. Why is it so important to speak about inclusion? Because to speak about inclusion means to speak about democracy. Speak about the possibility for everybody to feel themselves part of society. For this reason, this action to favor, to guarantee inclusion is not just an act involving the school, but is involving all the part of society. We need, for sure, laws in every country that guarantee the rights. The right to be part of society, the right to be not only accepted in a school, but to be part of the educational community. It's necessary that government provide instruments to avoid what we can call educational poverty. Because you know, my friends, that educational poverty is the real key, is the real support of poverty, because it's generating sort of cumulative effect over time. Educational poverty, that means poverty, and poverty is creating new educational poverty. That means don't have the capacity, the skills to be recognized in the society, to have a job, to have the capacity to intervene in the debate. That means to have, not to have the capacity to use the words to affirm themselves and to be dependent from others that are speaking for you. No, I want to speak from myself. I want that everybody can speak using the proper words to express their own right to be part of society. For this reason, we have to invest more on teachers. And this is one of the crucial elements that we discuss in our document. The role of teachers. Teachers are not only some professional person able to transfer information, knowledge. The teacher is the adult of reference, is somebody that is able to take the hand of the pupil in their own life track. Of course, we need the capacity to have data information, to have the capacity to know in all the countries, in all the regions, which is the real situation, and to share information. But it's clear that we need also to guarantee the schools are safe and there are places where it's possible to have good nutrition and it's possible to have the condition to share hopes and to share experiment of participation. And finally, we need to create communities to experiment what we can call in Italy educational pact of community or educational alliances. It's different, the kind of word that we can use, but the concept is clear. We cannot leave alone the schools. We cannot leave alone the teachers. We have to create communities where all the part of society, government, local governments, the associations, the volunteers, everybody has to take part of this idea that allowing this inclusion means to strengthen democracy, means to strengthen the capacity of a country to be part of the world family. And this is important in this moment. This is important in this moment, after the pandemic, in this period of so strong political tension, in period of war, it's necessary to reopen the possibility of an international dialogue, international cooperation. And for this reason, we have to restart from education. Education became a strong political issue. And for this reason, we have to start from the most delicate part of the story, that is inclusion. Inclusion means democracy. Inclusion means the capacity of the entire society to take responsibility for the future. This is the content of our document, and these are the arguments that we leave on the floor for the discussion among our young people. Thank you. Maria.
Now, it's day 3. We're probably all pretty tired, and we keep hearing about this idea of transforming. Are we being transformative enough? Is this transformative enough? And these are questions that myself and the co-leads of Action Track 1 kept asking ourselves. Before this pre-summit, we actually met up a few times to discuss about it, to discuss about whether Action Track 1 truly is transformative. And we were in many Zoom meetings. A lot of the times it would be, the Minister of Education in Italy with these like grand flags in the back, the posters of the SDGs in the back. And then it'll be me, like just in my bedroom, probably half in PJs to be honest. And we'll get together and we'll talk about transforming education. And once in a while, the test advisor would come in and ask us, is this transformative enough? Every now and then, when these questions pop up, the Ministry of Italy and the Ministry of Namibia, they would look at me hoping that I would have some kind of response. And, they'll look at me with all this hope in their eyes. And I'll look at my watch and I'm like, it's 1 a.m. in Sydney at the moment. I've got about 2 brain cells left in order to answer this. But luckily enough, I've got today with me 2 young people to support me, because without actually talking about these words and what it truly means, they're just merely buzzwords. So I would like to introduce 2 young people. Over to you, Uli.
Advisory Committee.
Good morning.
UN Foundation as Next Generation Fellow, and I'm so excited to be here this morning.
Thank you. Action track 1. So the first word is safe. Alice, Uli, I'm wondering if you could help me out with this one.
Yeah, definitely. Safe. Being appreciated, and you are free to express your ideas freely without the fear of being judged. And when speaking of safety in terms of schools, I'm talking about the safe schools. Are the students really happy and excited to be in a classroom and not afraid of being attacked in school? And that's why this is really important to bring this part of safety as we're talking about transformation. So that's my take on safe, ideally.
In my opinion, end of the day, schools are our homes. So in my personal experience, coming from a queer background, a teacher can be the person who supports who I am, who supports my identity, and who provides a safe environment for me to thrive.
Thanks, Alice and Uli. Now here's the next buzzword, inclusive. We hear about it all the time. What does that actually mean to you?
Accessed by highly privileged people. And you find that most of the young people from the less privileged community do not have access to that quality education. When I talk about inclusivity, it means that no one is being left behind, and regardless of their gender, their nationalities, their economic means, even language, really, and religion. So I believe that inclusivity is an umbrella bringing everyone together and making sure that no one is left behind. Yeah.
In my case, it the learning journeys of each student, support them in their mental health processes, supporting them in all the process of going through school. But it's also about creating curriculums that can support everyone, that can include everyone's story, and that everyone can feel part of being represented what they see at school, because at the end of the day, school and the world out there is pretty diverse, it's pretty exquisite and rich, so why don't we see that in school more often?
Thanks, Alice and Uli. Let's have a look at the next word now, equitable. Now, when I think about equitable, it reminds me of a story, actually. So when I was in my early teens, I remember I was in the classroom and I was doing this worksheet. And I remember I had made an error on that worksheet, actually. And the teacher, rather than giving me any supportive comments, what he said to me was, "Maria, girls can only be two things, pretty or smart. And you're not the latter." Now, at the time, I felt powerless. I said nothing. And I was just this young girl. I was just, growing in a low socioeconomic area. My parents themselves were Vietnamese refugees. They never stood up for themselves because they didn't have the English skills to do so. So when we think about equity, we need to think about the intersectionality of different factors that make up someone, whether that's gender, language, disability, sexual orientation, just to name a few. We need to look at equity through that lens. What about you, Uli? What do you think?
I think it may sound pretty basic, but it's why we're still talking about it. But multiple identities and diversity, they have higher dropout rates or less possibilities of access in school. So it's about a basic right, not only saying quality education, to get basic education at all. That's what it means equitable for me.
Thank you. And we've got one last word, healthy. What does that mean to you, Alice?
Thanks, Maria. When I think of healthy, it's so crucial to bring a perspective of well-being and mental health, and trying to make sure that it's being made a priority, making sure that we value the well-being of learners, and making sure that all the stakeholders know their roles in enforcing that word, health, making sure that NGOs, governments, civil society knows their place in making sure that we collaborate to enforce that in schools. And there's so many ways we could really collaborate, and some of the ideas that really came out in this action track is more on collaborating on providing meals for learners in learners from the crisis communities, such as the refugee communities, providing a collaborative effort in providing meals. I believe that well-being, providing meals, those are some of the initial ideas that comes to mind when I think of healthy schools.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when we talk about healthy, we often also need to touch on some topics typically deemed as taboo, like mental health, like sexual and reproductive health. And in order to do that, we need to be able to look at culture and see it as something not stagnant, not a still picture, but something that we can look at and think, okay, which aspects do we want to keep, and which aspects do we need to change, transform? That's where transforming education really comes down to. And young people are not asking, we're demanding for our rights to education and health. We heard that in the youth consultations yesterday. And there's youth movements such as Teachers' Consent that are really showing how young people are wanting to learn about sexual and reproductive health and mental health in schools as well. So, what that leads us to now is we need to remember that transforming education is about hard work. We have to put a lot of hard work into it. We're not here just to talk about some nice things. We're here to really look at some case studies and think about how we can apply it. And we need to remember that it is possible. It is possible to achieve it. So, what we usually do in Australia is, I used to be a teacher actually, so what we used to do in classrooms in Australia is we always start off with, what are we learning about and how do we get there? So for today's session, I want you to frame it like as if you are in a classroom. So I'll pass it over to Uli and Alice, who will explain the WALT and how we're going to achieve it.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, to achieve this, we will observe case studies and critically reflect on our own situation to respond to the following question. We're actually going to collaborate in answering this question. The question is, what is one key action that is needed to transform education for inclusive, equitable, safe, and healthy school? And the way we're going to do this is quite simple. You can use your device. It could be a phone, a computer, a tablet, connected to the internet, and go to www.menti.com. I'll give you a moment, and then you will type that code, 19963. Now, use your device. So feel free to use any language, really. You can use any language in responding to this question. It would be great to answer it now so that we could have the results in the end. I'll give you a moment to use your device, www.menti.com.
All right, so continue to enter on the Menti. We'll definitely have a look at it towards the end. Now, we are fortunate to have a very committed group of decision makers here today to help us expand on Action Track 1. Let me introduce them. So, Maria Tukone, Honourable Minister for the National Education and Literacy of Côte d'Ivoire. Anita Vanderbilt, Parliament Secretary to the Minister of International Development of Education. Professor Nao Liu, former Minister of several ministries, including Higher Education, Gender, Health, and Livestock and Fisheries. Minister of Education of Ecuador, who unfortunately is unable to join us here in person, but has sent us a video message for us to share. All right, so let's get started. Transforming education is not just about systems change. It requires radically changing mindsets and practices that exclude many children, young people, and adults from learning. Minister Kone, you ready? All right, so Minister Kone, I'm wondering if you could please tell us about an action that has succeeded in overcoming the stigma, discrimination, and bias that is prevalent in our societies to promote equal and inclusive participation in education. Over to you. So I think, can we challenge that as well? Over to you, Alice, for the next question.
Definitely. Thank you, Maria. And speaking on inclusivity,
serious about transforming education, if we're really serious about leaving no one behind, what we really need to do is listen to young people. And particularly, we need to listen to those who are the most impacted and the furthest behind. And that, of course, are young people and children who are in crisis and conflict situations, displaced and refugee children, children with disabilities, and of course, girls. Canada has been prioritizing the education of girls through our feminist international assistance policy. And 5 years ago, when we led the G7 summit, we had the Charlevoix Education Initiative. And this has informed all of our policies since then. And it really focuses on those barriers that girls' education that they face. And this includes not just inside the classroom, but also outside the classroom. Things like gender-based violence, health and nutrition, teacher education, biases and stereotypes in the curriculum, which is something we've heard a lot about today, and all of those things that really make it an inclusive classroom. But more recently, Canada has been very deliberate and very purposeful in including the voices of youth themselves in all of our policy and decision-making processes. And one of the pillars of that, through our Together for Learning Summit, which builds on our Refugee Education Council, which are people with lived experience, one of the pillars is amplifying the voices of young people. And one thing about all of us here as leaders is that we don't just have a voice, we have a megaphone. And one of the best things about having a megaphone is that you can share it, you can give it to someone else. So instead of talking to you today from the stage, as often happens when people like me talk about the priorities of young people, I think it's important for us as leaders to give that megaphone to young people themselves. And so I think it's more important to hear the priorities from the Together to Learning Youth Manifesto from one of the members, the young members of our Refugee Education Council. So I would like right now to yield the floor to Nayal Dang. And Nayal, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Parliamentary Secretary, for yielding the floor to me.
Niall, your contribution was really helpful. And moving on to Professor Luo, there are many aspects to ensuring that schools are inclusive, equitable, safe, and healthy for all learners. And now, given different ministerial responsibilities that you have had,
Thank you very much for that very, very important question. And I just want to start by saying that I think this room is full of ministers of education, and as the people that have been given the opportunity to spearhead issues around education. But what I learned is that ministries are just supposed to provide leadership and a coordinating role. What is important is for them to call upon and mobilize other colleagues in government to participate. And what am I saying? You talked about health. Therefore, I expect the ministers of education to transform the way the cabinet committees are set, so that within the membership of the cabinet subcommittee, you have ministers of health. We talk about children living with disabilities. We talk about social safety nets, so ministers of community development and social welfare must be part of that. We talk about safety, therefore ministers of home affairs. So basically, I'm saying call to collective action is one of the lessons that I learned to be able to succeed. Therefore, I expect this to be done at two levels. So you have the legislative level and the policy level of the ministers, but also an operational level where we need to start advocacy. Some of the backlashes we have had in trying to reform and transform is because there hasn't been enough advocacy. And this advocacy should, again, include other ministries, but also the community actors, the young people, the teachers, the students, and what we don't talk about a lot, the parents. They must be part of this advocacy group. Accountability, to ensure that there is research now, and after a few years, we are getting research for accountability's sake to see what have we done and what needs to be done. And therefore, the issue of research, data management becomes extremely important. Integration. We are talking about education transformation at a time where we have a lot of other things, such as climate change, such as other infectious diseases and epidemics like COVID. Therefore, integration becomes extremely important. Financing, domestic financing. Africa has so much resource, for example. Why should we not look internally? I expect us to have a campaign for tourism for education. Anybody who is booking into a hotel, there must be a percentage of money being charged that goes to education. A campaign for timber for education, so that all the timber processes, some of the money goes to education. We have enough resources as Africans to be able to move the transformation agenda for Africa without all the time looking outside. And I think what is also important for us is really the issue of cohesion, and also trying to know that there is education outside the classroom. Look at the weaving that is done in Ghana. Look at the basket making. Where is this? How do we bring this context into our transformation agenda of our education? So the list is endless. My role is to push our ministers of education to transform and call for collective action, integration, and research, accountability, and appropriate financing. Thank you.
thank you so much. That was powerful.
Thank you so much. I'm going to be asking a question to the Minister of Ecuador, so I'm going to switch into Spanish. So I invite you to wear your headsets. So La pandemia del COVID-19 nos ha recordado el rol de las escuelas en proteger la salud tanto física como mental de los estudiantes y asegurar su seguridad y su bienestar. Le preguntamos a la ministra Brown cómo puede el sector educativo reforzar y asegurar espacios de aprendizaje y espacios educativos seguros, libres de violencia, libres de discriminación y bullying, y asegurar que todos los estudiantes puedan crecer y beneficiarse de programas educativos vinculados a salud y nutrición.
A partir de mayo de 2021, el Ministerio de Educación del Ecuador implementa un plan de trabajo que establece 5 ejes y 20 líneas de acción. La formulación de este plan surge tras un análisis situacional del sistema educativo y el impacto en los procesos de aprendizaje de los estudiantes provocado por la emergencia sanitaria debido a COVID-19 y el cierre físico de las instituciones escolares. Cada uno de los 5 ejes propuestos en el plan promueven un esfuerzo por intensificar acciones que permitan garantizar la salud física y mental, la seguridad y la protección del estudiantado, y sobre todo, generar procesos educativos encaminados a la recuperación y el fortalecimiento de los aprendizajes, atendiendo al contexto que exigen las distintas realidades de la población. El primer eje, Encontrémonos, está centrado en la reactivación de las instituciones educativas y en los planes de reinserción escolar y nivelación. Dentro de este eje se destaca la estrategia Puntos de Reencuentro, que fueron espacios seguros de retorno al ambiente escolar, con el propósito de indagar acerca de la situación tanto académica como de salud física y socioemocional de los estudiantes. El retorno de forma presencial a las aulas en todo el sistema educativo nacional fue también una prioridad e inició en junio del 2021 con este gobierno nacional. El Plan Nacional Aprender a Tiempo es una acción afirmativa de apoyo técnico-pedagógico para instituciones educativas que están orientados a nivelación y recuperación de aprendizaje. El segundo eje, Todos, propicia la educación inclusiva e intercultural, que vincula e incluye a la comunidad. Dentro de este eje se puede nombrar la reapertura y fortalecimiento de las escuelas rurales, con la implementación de un modelo pedagógico multigrado pertinente al contexto, el diseño y socialización de guías para el apoyo de la inclusión educativa de estudiantes con necesidades educativas especiales asociadas o no a la discapacidad, y el trabajo articulado con la Secretaría de Educación Intercultural Bilingüe y Etnoeducación en el desarrollo de recursos educativos en la lengua de las distintas nacionalidades. 14 lenguas tiene el Ecuador. El tercer eje, Libres y Flexibles, está enfocado hacia la flexibilización del sistema para que las instituciones educativas ejerzan mayor autonomía, lo que les permitirá contextualizar y atender de forma pertinente las necesidades de cada territorio. Dentro de este eje, se ha trabajado en la implementación del modelo y la norma técnica de educación formal a distancia, que permitió la creación de 2 instituciones educativas fiscales gratuitas de educación a distancia, Arupos y Guayacanes. El diseño de la ruta de contextualización curricular del sistema educativo nacional, posiblemente uno de los desafíos más grandes para que en la educación exista pertinencia cultural. La emisión de la normativa de la libre elección de recursos editoriales educativos y para la promoción de los modelos de innovación de la oferta particular y fiscomisional también ha sido un avance importante. El cuarto eje, Fuertes, se refiere a la optimización de la estructura y funcionamiento del Ministerio de Educación y a la dignificación de la carrera docente y del personal educativo. Dentro de este eje se puede mencionar la realización de los diálogos de encuentros y encuentros continuos y transparentes de consensos con la comunidad educativa, la sociedad y actores involucrados en el campo educativo. La construcción del nuevo estatuto orgánico del Ministerio de Educación para también hacer más eficiente su presencia en el territorio nacional y los servicios que se brindan a la ciudadanía, sobre todo de atención ciudadana. La elaboración participativa del Plan Nacional de Formación Permanente para Docentes, fortaleciendo el desarrollo profesional docente. El diseño del modelo de procesos de acompañamiento y fortalecimiento pedagógico con asesores y auditores educativos calificados. El quinto y último eje es Excelencia. Está orientado al desarrollo de acciones para la construcción de un sistema educativo de excelencia que promueva la salud, la convivencia armónica y las trayectorias educativas personales con la democratización de la tecnología. Entre las acciones relevantes tenemos la presentación de la Agenda Educativa Digital para promover el aprendizaje y la alfabetización y la ciudadanía digital, el fortalecimiento del programa de alimentación escolar con una acción para la seguridad alimentaria de estudiantes del sistema educativo fiscal, el proyecto de prevención de embarazo en adolescentes, en articulación con otras carteras de Estado como parte de la estrategia presidencial para la erradicación de la desnutrición crónica infantil, y la socialización del recorrido participativo para la prevención de la violencia y los protocolos y rutas de actuación frente a situaciones de violencia detectadas o cometidas en el sistema educativo nacional. Como complemento de estas acciones, es importante destacar el apoyo de las organizaciones no gubernamentales, la sociedad civil y la empresa privada en el desarrollo de proyectos y programas para la rehabilitación de la infraestructura educativa. El Ecuador trabaja por la educación como el mayor compromiso de la comunidad. Entendemos que la educación debe transformarse y estamos dando pasos importantes para que así sea.
To thank the Minister from Ecuador. We have just heard from a number of countries on their experiences and recommendations to transform education. So moving to our last speaker, Ms. Kira, can you share your perspective from more of a global level on effective ways that countries can be supported to deliver on the promise of SDG 4 and good quality education for all?
Muchísimas gracias, Ulises. Thank you.
Thank you to all of the panelists who have spoken so eloquently and beautifully. Can we get another round of applause for all of our wonderful speakers? We have now come to the end of our discussion for now. Let me pass it over to Sanit Steenkamp to help us identify some key takeaways from today's session.
And then, of course, our very, very powerful youth leaders. Can you please rise so that we give you a proper round of applause? First to the youth, ladies and gentlemen, Alice, Yuli, and Maria. I think you will agree with me that you all did us so proud, and yourself. Thank you very much for speaking truth to power. Thank you very much for being open and honest about issues that are so close to your heart and sometimes not very easy to formulate and speak up in front of so many people internationally. So we thank you sincerely for that. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, can I also have a round of applause for our panels? It seems like this microphone is not making contact with the translators or the interpreters.
Good thinking.
Thank you. Is this better? Fantastic. Now give a round of applause for all our interpreters, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. To all our panelists, if you could please rise so that we can acknowledge you. For first and foremost, being willing to come and be present and engage. Ma'am, would you please rise? Ladies and gentlemen, now, interestingly, they may all be female, but they had the voices and they carried the voices of the young men, the elderly men, and the young boys. Thank you so much. I wish to start off with what His Excellency, the Honorable Minister, said from Italy. Inclusivity is about democracy. You cannot separate the two. So we have to remember also that he says education has become a very strong political issue. Now we are very proud that we could lead with Namibia, Italy, taking away today here. What is it that we've seen and that we've heard here? This week was so important for all of us. We've listened, we've engaged, and we had an opportunity to internalize that which we have heard. Internalize so that we take it further to see how we can improve on it. Because the realities are, if we talk about transformation, we said it's not about reform. It's hard work. It requires a mindset change. It requires us to be honest and open and robustly discussing solutions. How do we pass the roadblocks that are still there? If you could just turn to the audience, shall we give her a wonderful applause. Our Italian minister, and then if we can put them into certain categories. There is the issue of, that we've heard all our speakers focused on, and we heard examples, focusing on the legislature, having policies, the right policies and the right plans in place on a political level, because education is a public good, but it's a very strong political issue. We've heard that. So the policies, what policies should be having in place? First and foremost, we should ensure that the voices of the youth are heard. Those who have been on the periphery, who has been invisible, the refugee child, the child from a crisis, the child,